Today, we are very excited to welcome back our friend Naomi Wolf. Her book is The Bodies of Other, which I enjoy reading. We discussed it about a year ago with her here, and I can't believe it's been a year. So it's about damn time we brought her back. Naomi has written several books, some of which have been absolute iconic. And she has been raising some alarms about some of the concerns, particularly about the mRNA vaccine on reproductive health in women. You can follow Naomi at Naomi R. Wolf, and she has been attacked and banned on Twitter and always has some very clear, provocative thoughts. And it's about time. So let's get to it.
Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
And speaking of more to say, you can find more of Naomi at drdrnaomiwolf.com. And also, as I said, follow her, Naomi R. Wolf is where her Twitter handle is. Of course, she is renowned for her feminist book, The Beauty Myth, which became a leading, really one of the leading canon for the third wave feminist movement. She was a journalist. She remains a journalist, a Rhodes Scholar, and as I said, an author of multiple books, most recently, The Bodies of Others. And it's been too long, so let's welcome in Naomi Wolf. There you are.
Thank you.
Hi
nice
there.
to be with you again. Hi.
It's great to be with you again, too. And I want to start with a very sincere apology. I want to, as effusively as I can, fall on my sword. And I want to explain why and what and frame it. So sit back and enjoy this if you like this kind of thing. So, so Naomi's book is a wonderful, the subtitle is The New Authoritarians, COVID-19 and the War Against Humanity. And it reads in real time. I read it last time you were in here. It reads in real time, sort of so much of the confusion and the the extraordinary experiences we all had. She looks into it with the mind of the clear-sightedness of a journalist as it was happening, as she was raising issues, as we were all wondering what was going on. She chronicles this in the first half of the book, and she gets into concerns about female reproduction and the issues that women were having from the vaccine, because the vaccine obviously figured prominently into some of her concerns. And I will just say, we now know that we have a very significant Pfizer executive on the record saying that they knew about these menstrual irregularities being a very serious concern. I have now seen pathological specimens that show excess spike protein in the ovaries, in the adrenal gland. The executive in the Project Veritas case pointed out that he thought maybe it had something to do with the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which is a very common it's a very delicate cycling system, a neuroendocrine system that women have that can get easily set off. But we now know some of the possible mechanisms, not just the ovaries, but also there could be, we've seen excess spike protein now in the myelin and actually in the neuronal cell walls. So it could actually be direct neuronal effects. And we also know that spike protein is affecting plasminogen activator inhibitor by inhibiting that inhibitor and causing problems with bleeding and clotting. And we, of course, also know now that this spike protein is very much a part of what we call an endotheliitis, or a lining of the artery problem that could easily be manifest in the uterine wall and the uterine lining. So there's at least 5 mechanisms I could think of that could be causing this that are of serious concern. And I am getting emotional when I want to say this. When Naomi brought this up, the kindest thing I can say is I was dismissive. I was quietly dismissive of what she was bringing up, because I had seen menstrual irregularities caused by everything in my career. And I thought, it's just another thing. It's just another thing. I was wrong. I apologize. I got it. I don't know whether we're going to find out exactly what's going on, but I was as wrong as I could be. And the one thing that this pandemic has taught me, well, one of the many things, I've learned a lot of things that I didn't want to know, but the one thing that I did want to know is hubris and certainty is the enemy. You can't be certain about a lot, and don't discount anything until we know for sure what the data is. So I thank you for bringing it up, and I most sincerely apologize. You don't have to accept my apology. I want to fall on my sword. If I had a samurai sword, I'd fall on it right now, and that is that. So we can get on with
tearing up.
Okay.
Really? Oh, okay. Dr. Drew, can I jump in there now and respond to that?
Please.
Look, I really appreciate what you just said. I wasn't offended. It's been a long year and a half trying to bring these concerns, not just to you, but to everybody. And I'm not offended, but what I am is very appreciative that you're on a learning curve, as we all have to be. And that's what a real scientist and a real healer and a real, journalist is always supposed to be doing, which is learning. So
Yeah.
I just really, what I'm seeing is that, the world is really dividing, or the world of doctor, I'm sorry, I have a puppy, the world of doctors and epidemiologists and virologists is really dividing into, especially male doctors and epidemiologists and virologists, into those who really take on board how important women are, and how delicate are all the systems that have to work together in order for women to menstruate, lactate. I'm sorry, bear children.
That is the evil dog that took down Naomi's shoulders. You'll see us. She's in a sling right now. And that dog is devilish.
Dog is loud. Maybe I should take a moment to go hold the dog, because I am actually alone in the house with this podcast. And if I
sure, whatever you have to do, and I can talk to Susan for a second. Now, did I adequately satisfy what you needed me to do? Because Susan was unhappy. I didn't think I offended Naomi back then, but I just didn't. I didn't treat what she was saying with the respect it deserved.
She responded to you appropriately and said, "You don't know anything about women. I'm a woman." Okay, I like that about her.
I don't know anything. That's not fair.
And I loved her for that. But I just teared up when you were giving that apology, and I think that Naomi's a friend of ours. So when you saw that she was taking some, heat on Twitter, you said, we need to have her come back because I need to apologize. And I was like, for what? And then you reminded me, and I went, oh yeah, you do. So, but I can't believe it's been almost a year, and you were so way ahead of the curve.
Well, thank you. I mean, but you guys are so sweet, and we are friends, and hopefully friends always learn together. But really, what's much more important is what's happening to millions of women. And I'd love to jump right in. And I mean, I thought that your presentation, your introduction, was really important about what could be causing the bleeding and clotting and dysmenorrhea and agonizing cramps and, horrible ruination of menses that, I heard about a year and a half ago and was deplatformed by Twitter. We now know, with the collusion of the CDC, Carol Crawford of the CDC, and the White House singling out my accurate tweets saying that women are having menstrual dysregulation, and a horrible ruination of my reputation. My career followed my accurately noting, as I've noted, I think I may have said this to you the last time we spoke, for 35 years, I've been writing about women's health and sexuality and reproductive health. And so this was completely aligned with the journalism I've been doing forever and ever and ever. And so suddenly in this new world, it's, unaskable. It's an unaskable question, what's happening to these women. But to fast forward, and forgive me, as we were saying, I was describing, I broke my shoulder. So that's why I've got non-fashion statement going on here.
That evil dog.
The puppy, the treacherous puppy, adorable but treacherous. But fast forward, at Daily Clout, we have a project in which, when I was on War Room, I put out the call for experts to help us read the 55,000 documents a month that would be released under court order because of lawyer Aaron Series' successful lawsuit, that were the Pfizer's own internal documents. And these are documents that the FDA asked the court to keep hidden for 75 years. And luckily, this judge did not go along with that. And these documents have been released. And of course, they're too technical for lay journalists and too vast for lay journalists to understand and read through. So to my amazement, at first 2,500 and now 3,500 experts, ranging from biostatisticians to medical fraud investigators, RNs, physicians of all backgrounds, clinicians, research scientists, lab clinicians, anesthesiologists, pathologists, et cetera. They've all united around the world to read through these documents and issue reports. And so we now have 54 completed reports. Our book, which we just issued as an ebook, the War Room Daily Pfizer Documents ebook, is in the top 10 Amazon Kindle ebook bestsellers for the last few weeks. And I recommend that you all look at it. But where I'm going is, in these 50 reports, Dr. Robert Chandler, who's a distinguished sports medicine physician who has treated the Angels and the Lakers, he has identified one other mechanism that I want to share with you about the menstrual dysregulation. What that is he found that, well, in the Pfizer document, it shows a chart that confirms a Japanese biodistribution study of the year before. And sorry, it's hard to keep your hair in one going in the right direction with one hand unavailable.
One hand,
but,
yep.
But he showed that in the Pfizer documents, it shows that the lipid nanoparticles in particular leave the injection site immediately. And of course, all the spokespeople told us they stay in the injection site, nothing traverses the body. But in fact, they move through the body within 48 hours, like Dr. Chandler says, a shotgun blast. And they accumulate in the spleen. They cross the blood-brain barrier, causing some brain inflammation. This explains some of the personality changes or cognitive changes that some people have noticed in their loved ones who are vaccinated. But they also accumulate in the liver, the adrenals. I may have mentioned the spleen, the lymph nodes, and if you're a woman, in the ovaries. And what's very disturbing is that Dr. Chandler found that there's not a mechanism for them leaving the ovaries. So the first time you get an injection, some of these industrial fats covered in polyethylene glycol accumulate in your ovaries. And these are designed to clot, right? That's what they do. They're liquid on superfreezing temperatures, and they become viscous. They thicken at room temperature or at body temperature. And so with your second shot, more of them accumulate in your ovaries. And of course, you need your fallopian tubes, you need your ovaries, you need all of that to not be gummed up with industrial fats. And so with every booster, more and more are accumulating in your ovaries. So that's one possible mechanism, in addition to what you found, no doubt, for the menstrual and other reproductive dysregulation that we've seen. And I guess to fast forward there too, one of his later reports shows that of the 43,000 adverse events, the Pfizer documents, more than 72% are in women. And of these, Pfizer's own words are 16% are reproductive disorders. So those are Pfizer's own words. And then you've got this chart, and I really recommend that everyone look at it. It's on dailycloud.io in Dr. Chandler's latest report, but it's also in the ebook. And it's from Pfizer. And it shows like literally 25 different names for ruining women's menstrual cycle and thousands of cases. So it's like 2 periods a month, bleeding every day, all month, no bleeding at all, agonizing bleeding, hemorrhaging, passing clots. And so they knew. So when Project Veritas came out with this guy, Dr. Walker, saying we really don't know what's going on, Pfizer knew perfectly well what was going on. They had their own exhaustive, Mengele type documentation of horrible things they were doing to women's menstrual cycles. And I'll pause there, but I will just headline by saying that the menstrual dysregulation that Pfizer was like weirdly fixated on, right, for a vaccine for respiratory illness. Why are they so preoccupied? menstrual cycles. That's just part of what we have found now in all of these 50 reports, now 54 reports, to be a 360-degree focus on human reproduction and disrupting human reproduction.
Yeah, I think unfortunately that's where this is going to go. And we're at the stage now where there's sort of general agreement that something significant is going on. There's multiple candidate mechanisms. And by the way, COVID could be a culprit in this as well, right? I mean, we don't know because they haven't asked the questions. They have to really, it's looking like, based on Dr. Cole's work, who had all the pathology specimens, it really looks like the vaccine spike because they're not finding the nucleocapsid protein in with the spike protein in all these deposits in the ovaries and the adrenal glands, things like that. So it looks like something that is only delivering a spike, which is, of course, the vaccine. And so some of it may be benign. Maybe that lipid nanoparticle thing is a red herring. Maybe it doesn't really do anything, but it has to be ruled out. It has to be looked at carefully because something is up. And the fact that Pfizer was as concerned as they were is your smoking gun. So what comes next? What about the reproductive issues? Because of course that's where that's the horror story in all this.
That is the horror story. Well, Dr. Drew, I hate to do this, and Susan, I hate to do this, but it's not that Pfizer was worried about it. All of the documentation indicate that that was Pfizer's goal. And I hate to put it that way, but there's no other conclusion to reach. I mean, Pfizer has so much focus on analyzing the disruption of reproduction. And when they find that something is ruining human reproduction, they don't let the FDA know there's a problem here, you've got to stop right away. They double down. And I'll give you another example. The lipid nanoparticles, Moderna's website boasts that they traverse every cell in the human body. And that's why I personally didn't get vaccinated, because I have a neurological condition. And just, with my English major 8th grade biology knowledge of how the myelin sheath works, I couldn't figure out how, something that traversed every cell in the human body is not going to disrupt electrical impulses. But leaving that aside, these lipid nanoparticles have been known for 10 years to traverse every membrane in the human body. That's how they cross the blood-brain barrier. They were designed to take medicine to brain tumors. But of course, if you've got a brain tumor, you're pretty desperate, and a risk has a benefit.
It's worth it. Right. The risk is worth it. Well, this is, by the way, throughout the pandemic, what I'd been complaining about was the risk benefit diathesis has been ignored, whether it's from masking or schools or lockdowns or whatever. They just seem unable to do a risk reward analysis. And I was commenting just today, I was realizing that it's been a year since the Super Bowl where everyone was mandated to wear a mask in an outdoor stadium. 1 year ago, with the level and activity of COVID really the same as it is right now. Think how insane how hysterical we were, that for the same level of COVID as we're experiencing at the present moment, we were having LA County authorities handing down mandates because we were in a panic, and here we are. Yeah, it seems to me that well, certainly it is the case that the FDA was willing to accept a lot. What do you think was, if we just, I don't want to assume we know the motivation unless they spell it out in any of those documents. Do they say we're trying to do X?
Well, it's more like the documents are like walking into a room where there are several bodies on the floor and they've been stabbed to death and they're bleeding. And there's murder weapons lying around, but you don't, and a big object has someone's name on it that is the source of the murder weapon, but you don't know why this all happened. So let me give you some examples.
Okay.
So the lipid nanoparticles traverse every membrane. That means they also traverse the placenta. So Pfizer knew that the lipid nanoparticles were traversing the placenta, and they knew that babies were being born early because the placentas of women were being made not intact. And in fact, Dr. Jim Thorpe, whom I'm sure you've had on or know about, maternal fetal medicine specialist, shows slides of a netting that you can see of calcifications around unvaccinated women's placentas caused by the lipid nanoparticles traversing the placenta. And in fact, the lipid nanoparticles go into the fetus, right? They go everywhere. So our own Amy Kelly, who's the project director, found in the Pfizer documents that Pfizer knew that the lipid nanoparticles were entering the membranes of fetal baby boys' testes, and not just degrading their testes in utero, right? And, little boys, when they're vaccinated, this happens to them as well, but also degrading the Leydig cells and the Sertoli cells, which are kind of the factories of masculinity, so that these little boys and even baby boys aren't going to grow up to, develop normally as adult men. And we don't even know what effect that's going to have on their ability to reproduce. But Pfizer kept going. Pfizer knew that, in this chart that shows all the menstrual dysregulation, there's so much spontaneous abortion and miscarriage. And in one section of the Pfizer documents, there were Pfizer told women not to get pregnant during the trials, which is interesting, right? It's a respiratory disease. What the heck? But some of them got pregnant nonetheless, 270. Of those, Pfizer lost 234 of the records, which I gather is illegal. You're supposed to follow the subjects to the end of the trial. But of the 36 women whom they followed to term, over 80% of them lost their babies. The babies died. And let me go on. Throughout the Pfizer documents, there's this really sick focus on reproduction. And it's like, it's almost like it's so focused that the goal of the injection has to do with reproduction. For example, in one section of the Pfizer documents, they're injecting male Wistar-Hann rats, and they don't inject the female Wistar-Hann rats. Then they mate them, and then they sacrifice the rats. And then they do an autopsy of the rat's reproductive organ tissue. I don't know why, but why are they looking at that? Pfizer tells vaccinated men not to have intercourse with women of childbearing age, and if they do, to use 2 reliable forms of contraception. Pfizer defines exposure to the vaccine as skin contact, inhalation, and sexual intercourse, especially at conception. So Pfizer knows there's something that vaccinated men's sperm does to a zygote or an embryo. And they're warning, vaccinated men not to have intercourse with women. They define exposure as having sex with a vaccinated man, basically. Pfizer knew that the lipid nanoparticles in the polyethylene glycol, this petroleum byproduct, which coats the lipid nanoparticles, it biodistributes. Well, it also biodistributes into breast milk if you're lactating. So Pfizer knew that 4 of the vaccinated women's breast milk turned blue-green, and that babies who were nursing from vaccinated moms were showing failure to thrive, agitation, sleeplessness, and convulsions in some cases. And one poor newborn baby in the Pfizer documents went into seizures from nursing from a vaccinated mother and died in the emergency room. So Pfizer knew all of this, and they kept going. They knew that the injection suppresses the sperm count and sperm motility of men. And, again, just going to kind of the disabling level of all of the metaphors. Susan will appreciate what I'm saying here, I think. All of the metaphors, all of the language we have about menstrual dysregulation in relation to this injection are inadequate, in my view, from having seen the Pfizer documents, because we've never been faced with anything like this. We've never been faced with a thing that happens to women that leads them to, at industrial scale of numbers, like hemorrhage, or past clots that they can't identify, right? And so what I'm saying is the numbers, and I just did a video on this, the tens of thousands of women in the Pfizer documents who are passing clots, hemorrhaging, bleeding twice a month, menopausal women, so many way postmenopausal women bleeding, 80-year-old women bleeding, 70-year-old women bleeding, 10-year-old girls having, menarche for the first time when they're getting injected, right? Women disabled from bleeding, right? We've never seen this before. So the CDC calls it, a change in your period. You might have, menstrual symptoms is maybe the most that they say. And yet what I'm seeing is women being really disabled at scale, because how can you be a student or an athlete or a mom of small children or a worker or stand for 10 hours in a lab if you're a scientist, or be a crossing guard or an agricultural worker, any of the things women do, if you're bleeding in such a disabling way? And that's right in the and women also describing agonizing cramps upon having intercourse with vaccinated husbands. So all of these things I think are much bigger than just, your period lasts a day longer, which in itself is a huge change in women's lives and in their hormonal balance.
There's maybe a little bit of good news in the wide age spectrum of this bleeding, because it does sort of tilt the potential mechanism back into the bleeding, clotting, endotheliitis zone rather than the endocrine, which would be, I think, preferable. I mean, we already know that the spike and the virus causes a lot of this kind of stuff. And at least we wouldn't have to have a second, mechanism at work here that is only something that applies to women. Again, fingers are crossed. I'm open to any and all explanations still at this point.
Sure, forgive me.
In other words,
why is it better?
for a woman, for an 80-year-old postmenopausal woman to bleed, uterine bleeding, there has to be either sort of a massive exposure to estrogen, which I don't know where that would have come from, or something wrong with the lining of the uterus, clotting or bleeding, a clotting disorder. And that we know is one of the potential mechanisms. So I'm thinking, maybe that's some evidence that that's more the issue than the hormones, which would be good. And it was not so much on the reproductive side, but in terms of, how disabling, how problematic this all could end up being. But I want to stand back from the vaccine for just a second. And one of the things that has become crystal clear since we last talked to you is from the FOIA documents of some of the back and forth, two things from the FOIA documents of the back and forth with Dr. Fauci and his colleagues. One is that they were initially 70 to 80% convinced that this was a lab leak, and then their email chain goes silent for 7 days, and magically a article is produced in Nature magazine about where the natural source of the virus might have been. While the entire time on the email chain that the FOIA produced shows clearly the people, they were aware of the gain of function research. They said it's got to be that. They were aware of this. They knew this virus, 70% probability it's a lab leak, and then silence, and then a Nature article denying all of it, which is interesting. So there was that bit of data that we now have since we last spoke. And then the other thing that I want you to help me make sense of, because I still feel like there must be some missing piece of this, which was that Fauci sent his minion over to China. The Chinese showed them their lockdown procedures, which were political procedures, not medical procedures that ever had been contemplated in human history. They were political in origin and intent. And our leaders came back and said, they've got it figured out. Tell Italy to do what China's doing, and we need to have a national policy exactly like Wuhan. That to me is the most. I was suspicious about it. I thought that's got to be what it was, and now we know that's what it was. That is a phenomenal observation. What is it as simple as they were hoodwinked and they were in a hysterical state and didn't use their right mind, or was there something else that you figure might have been going on? Because you have a way of figuring out the Chinese piece that I don't often see.
Thank you. Well, sadly, so I don't, fully understand whether the lab leak was an accident or an intentional release of a bioweapon. I think it's super notable that the Wuhan lab is run by the People's Liberation Army, just like all science is in China. And I think that scientists like Dr. Fauci, who talk about our Chinese colleagues and are very happy to outsource basically the exact same experiments on function and bats, from, and this was one time I got suspended initially from Twitter, from Dr. Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina to Wuhan after President Obama made gain of function experimentation illegal. They were being super naive in thinking, oh, these are just, these are not our existential adversaries. I mean, all science is overseen by the CCP. But whether it was intentional or an accident to release that bioweapon, and, as a former political consultant, I'm a big fan of, you can have like Rahm Emanuel's quote, I think he's quoting someone earlier, never let a good emergency go to waste. It's very possible that it could have been accidental and then made use of, right, politically. But whatever the origins, for sure, I am certain that this vaccine is a bioweapon. And I say that with great restraint and with very conservative reasoning. And it's because I've seen the SEC filing for the BioNTech vaccine for 2021, our SEC, in which the filing explains to the SEC that 100% completed is a tech transfer of the IP, of all the IP in the vaccine to China. And it doesn't say a Chinese individual, a Chinese company, it says to China. So the IP is owned by China. I know that Fosun Pharmaceutical, I may have brought this up earlier, but I'll just restate it because now that we've seen the Project Veritas expose, it all should make horrifying sense to everyone. Fosun Pharmaceutical is a major Chinese pharmaceutical company owned by the CCP, basically run by a CCP official. And they partnered with BioNTech to make 1 billion doses of the vaccine. But China doesn't take this vaccine. So Fosun and BioNTech built manufacturing plants, 13 of them all over Western Europe, and 2 of them in the United States. And one is in Springfield, Massachusetts, and one is in Princeton, New Jersey. So now when you get a Pfizer injection, you're getting an injection in which the IP, which could mean the ingredients, the method of manufacturing, even the data generated by, the rollout, all of that is owned by China. And also the manufacturing and distribution are in the hands of China. And lastly, there are ways in which this injection can be made more and less lethal, including something as simple as dose, with Moderna at 100 micrograms being more than 3 times more lethal than Pfizer at 30 micrograms for an adult. And the 100 microgram dose was so lethal within the Pfizer documents that they withdrew it from the experiments due to its quote unquote reactogenicity. But they didn't tell any of the people who got the 100 microgram Moderna dose, no more boosters, it's too dangerous. They just kept going. And another important piece of evidence to me that this is a bioweapon is that you can manipulate its lethality on the basis of temperature. As I mentioned, it's liquid at super freezing temperatures and more solid as it warms. And the directions about storage have changed dramatically. So it used to be you have to store it, at sub-zero temperatures, and now it's like, oh, you can leave it out for 12 hours. And this is borne out by the fact that there's that site, How Bad Is My Batch.info, I believe, where you can see that batches are more and less lethal, and that's easily done with things like dosage, problems in manufacture, which have been thoroughly documented by whistleblowers like Brooke Jackson, and and something as simple as temperature. Last 2 pieces of evidence I have that it's a bioweapon are the distribution of adverse events. In the 42,000 plus database of adverse events in the Pfizer documents, 36,000 of them are in the United States. The next largest tranche of adverse events are in Western Europe, ranging from more to less politically important countries. So Britain, Germany, France, then Italy, Spain, Greece. And all of the other 50 plus countries where the injection was rolled out combined in that database add up to only 7,000 adverse events. So it's not a random distribution of adverse events. And I guess the last thing I would say, and then I really will pause because I know it's a lot to take in, is that look at who's being mandated, right? And I got a lot of this guidance from, I've got to credit my husband, who was in military intelligence for 12 years and then doing other intelligence work. And early on, he said, we're being attacked by China. It's just that China engages in asymmetric warfare, meaning, go after the water supply, go after our intellectuals, go after our media, go after our universities, go after our politicians. And that's exactly what they've done. And go after our medical establishments and our pharmaceuticals. And that's exactly what they've done. So I guess the last piece of evidence is who got mandated, right? And again, as a political consultant, if you wanted to take out a country, whom would you mandate? Our soldiers, our special forces, our sailors, our firefighters, our first responders, our healthcare workers, right? These are the people who are, and the children of the elite. The Ivy League universities are mandating, and state universities are not mandating as aggressively. And China is pouring money into universities like Penn, like Yale, like Cornell, Princeton, and pharma is as well. And these are the universities that are saying, like my alma mater Yale said to the students, they can't come back for spring term unless they get the booster, but they're not mandating the president or the administration. So, if you were a country trying to take out the United States of America with this bioweapon, those are the populations you'd go for, because we're so easy to subdue, with these populations disabled or ill.
Well, I mean, normally in my had I not seen so many things that I was worried were true come true, I would have a much harder pushback on what you just said. But now I'm like open to anything because I've seen so much stuff that I never thought was possible. But I do want to ask some questions about it. So let's do this. Take a little break, and I want to ask this before I do. The information that comes from your husband always intrigues me because he is somebody who is in the middle of all this stuff. Is he still working with the intelligence? And if so, is our military and our intelligence community listening to him, thinking about these things, or is he getting it from within, inside? Or can you comment on any of that?
Well, to my knowledge, he's not, but what do I know? No,
Right.
to my knowledge, he's not. But
Okay.
he's in private intelligence now. But
Okay.
he has friends and colleagues who are in that world, really good people who are trying to serve their country, and they're very, very, very worried. And it's not that from that community, this theory of the injection being a bioweapon derives. That's not the case. That's my conclusion based on the evidence I've seen.
Mm.
But absolutely from many people in that community and other commentators like General Spalding, Michael Sanger, other really respected commentators from the military as well as from the intelligence community, the concern about China, people who know geopolitics are absolutely terrified and appalled. Frank Gaffney is another voice about this, about our being subjugated by China, in all of these different ways. And the thing Brian, my husband, said to me, which has really stayed with me and really makes a lot of sense. Well, one of the things is that both China and Russia have a methodology of tenderizing the enemy, meaning to kind of exhaust a population, wear them out, demoralize them before there's any kind of kinetic war. And the Chinese, it's been explained to me, see kinetic war as a last resort or a failure. And really the goal is to bring down your adversary in a bunch of different ways that don't have to do with a shooting war. And that's called asymmetric warfare. And that's a very well-established approach that we're not used to in the West, right? We think of war, Revolutionary War, people wearing blue, wearing red, in columns, shooting at each other. That is not asymmetric warfare. Asymmetric warfare is well, as Brian put it, they want our land, they want our water, they want our energy resources. They don't want our population.
On that cheery note, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Not sure how to say I love you this Valentine's Day? Well, nothing says I love you more than a few minutes of relaxation, and Genucel Skincare does just that. Gives you the luxury gift of feeling like you spent the entire day in the spa, all while, in fact, in the comfort of your own home. Susan loves to feel pampered and special, especially on Valentine's Day, so why not relax with a detoxifying mask and feel amazing after only one use?
I know I'm a snob about the products I use on my face. Everybody knows it. Every time I go to the dermatologist's office, they're just rows and rows of different creams. Retinols, vitamin C cream, under eye cream, night creams.
Scrubs.
And then when I get to the counter, they're overpriced. All kinds of products that you can all find at Genucel.com. I've fallen in love with this product at a fraction of the price. I've been using Genucel for 6 months now, and I'm very impressed.
Genucel's mask works wonders by pulling out all of your imperfections to make you feel refreshed and looking like you just stepped out of a facial appointment. Order the Dr. Drew package today and try this amazing mask for free. That's right, every single Dr. Drew and Susan package includes a free mask to celebrate you and your loved one on this Valentine's Day. Go to Genucel.com/Drew and enter code Drew for an extra 10% off your entire purchase. Plus, all orders are upgraded to priority shipping for free. That's Genucel.com/Drew, GENUCEL.com/DREW. Despite the U.S. blowing through the $31.4 trillion debt ceiling this January, the White House and the government still refuses to reduce spending. When it comes to fiscal responsibility, you can't afford to bury your head in the sand. Now would be a great time to consider gold with Birch Gold. In times of high uncertainty and instability, gold is king. Birch Gold makes it easy to convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in precious metals. Here's what you need to do. Visit birchgold.com/Drew to claim your free information kit, the info kit on gold, and then talk to one of their precious metals specialists. Think about this. To dig our country out of this mountain of debt, every single taxpayer in the country would have to write a check for $247,000, and of course they're not, so it's only getting worse. Protect yourself with gold today by visiting birchgold.com/Drew. That is BIRCH gold.com/Drew. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of happy customers, and countless 5-star reviews, you can trust Birch Gold to protect your future. Here's what I want you to do. Visit birchgold.com/Drew today. We are back with Naomi Wolf. The book is The Body of Others. The website is drdrnaomiwolf.com. And, of course, Twitter, Naomi R. Wolf, no E on Wolf. And so that's all very cheery, what we were just talking about. I hate that stuff, and I'm hoping it's not true. But let's look at some of the evidence on the initial virus. So one of the things that has jumped out at me lately is that let's just, for the sake of assumption, say it was an accidental release on Wuhan, out of the Wuhan lab. One of the, so again, I'm looking for smoking gun evidence all over the place here with these various things I'm wondering about. And isn't it interesting how the Chinese government continued to allow plane flights from Wuhan to other Western countries, but would not allow any flights within China from Wuhan? So in other words, it looks as though they were intending to allow the virus to spread to their enemies, but they want to make sure they contain it within Wuhan. Is that a reasonable conclusion from that bit of evidence, or was it just an unlucky call?
Look, again, that room full of dead bodies, right? You've got that piece of evidence. You've got the evidence that they didn't let anyone into the lab to take a look at it. When they finally let people in, it was the guy Peter Daszak, who engineered, and funded whatever it was they did, the persecution of people for raising a lab leak theory, the, initial floating of these nonsensical stories about, wet markets and bat soup, all of it together. And also, let's remember, this is a really hard thing to really process, but we as human beings tend to think if something hasn't happened in our lifetime, it's inconceivable. But biological warfare of this kind has been done throughout history. America put a smallpox in blankets and gave them to Native Americans. People have been lobbing infected dead animals, like the Romans used to send them in, over the ramparts when they wanted to infect a targeted city that they were besieging. This is not an unusual way to wage warfare in human history. It's sneaky. It's not considered honorable by post-Enlightenment Western standards, but this is it's really painful to have this conversation, to wrap your mind around the prospect of our leadership being bought up by our existential adversaries, and that there's a war being waged against us, but nothing else makes sense. And so you can fight more effectively if you do process that. But also look at who the Chinese are. I don't mean Chinese people, of course. I mean the Chinese Communist Party. These are people who soldered their own people into their homes, who harvest the organs of Uyghurs, who have vast concentration camps in which they hold people nominally with COVID. This is a brutal, sadistic, totalitarian state that's subjugating a quarter of the people on planet Earth. So why would we, for all these years, ever since the Clinton era, when all the elite of the West was like, it's so cool that China is such a great globalist partner. All I could think is, why do you think you're going to exploit China and China isn't going to exploit you? Right? It's kind of racist, this assumption that, the West is always going to, win, and they're just going to make our trinkets. No, these are, sadistic, sophisticated. It's a sadistic, sophisticated leadership, and they disappear people, they disappear artists, they threaten people's families if they're dissidents. It's why would they not want to weaken us? They've said they want to weaken us. They have a white paper saying that they expect to be the world's superpower by 2030, because most of the rest of the world will be debilitated or preoccupied with their health. And that's exactly what we've got in the United States now with this mRNA rollout. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with, or have brought your audience, Ed Dowd's work, or Igor Chidov's work. Igor Chidov is showing a dramatic drop in live births around the world, 13 to 20% down, exactly 9 months after the mRNA injection got rolled out. And Ed Dowd has also shown a dramatic escalation in disabilities, people leaving work from disability, and otherwise unexplained deaths. And if you want to be the world's economic superpower, why not? I mean, just think about the working women of America. If you're really disabled half the month with this catastrophic bleeding, you're going to take disability, or you're going to take days off of work. It's going to be a direct hit to the productivity of the American economy.
What about the notion, I think some people have suggested, that we're unfairly scapegoating China? How do we defend against that accusation?
What thoughtful person says that?
I've seen just saw a book, in fact, come across my Twitter feed. I don't know who this guy is. You may know already. Huff, is that his name? Something like that. Let's see if I can
Andrew
find
Huff. Huff. There are two Huffs.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Andrew Huff, I think it was. Is that somebody I should know?
I mean, I get them mixed up, so I'm the wrong person to ask. But
yeah.
I know one of the allegedly or ostensibly a former pharma employee who has come forward, or biotech. I don't have the details, but so we're unfairly scapegoating China.
I think it's called The Truth About Wuhan. Looks like, is he an EcoHealth Alliance guy? Is that what this is?
That's it. Former EcoHealth.
He was former.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. So, but I mean, it's interesting to me that, I mean, he might have been, of course he has territory to defend, but maybe he knows these people and he feels confident in them, but he may have been hoodwinked too, right? I mean, they certainly hoodwinked all the other scientists that came back with the lockdown information.
I just keep going back to whodunits. This injection is leading young adults to drop dead or have myocarditis. A piece of evidence I didn't mention was that in 2021 in Hong Kong, which of course is overseen by the Chinese Communist Party, there was an experiment to inject Wistar Han rats, and with the mRNA vaccine, the first injection led to some damage, and the second injection led to catastrophic damage, including enlarged hearts and white patches on the heart, which we're seeing now with young adults with myocarditis. And to me, that experiment, again, it's interesting to have someone with a political background look at science, because to me, that experiment clearly under the aegis of the Chinese Communist Party was showing leadership how you kill people with no fingerprints, because it showed that the subject will get worse and worse and worse, culminating in multi-organ system failure with each injection. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing healthy young adults drop dead. I mean, I have a loved one who's a college student, and someone on his campus died, healthy 20-something. And I looked up online, college student dies suddenly. And there were literally, like three different campuses in the week prior in which students had dropped dead. We remember the world before 2020. Young adults didn't drop dead. Athletes didn't drop dead on the soccer field. Musicians and performers didn't drop dead. And again, if you've seen the Pfizer documents, there's such thousands of strokes, thousands of thrombocytopenia events, thousands of neurological events, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia. A huge number one side effect, interestingly, is joint pain. Number two is myalgia, muscle pain, which people really don't know. And so I know young adults who've had like knee surgery, shoulder surgery, people in their 20s, their limbs, their joints are going out. And again, the lipid nanoparticles, I'm always intrigued by this because it's cartilage, right? Now it's going through cartilage. What does that do to cartilage? We don't know. But young people are being absolutely disabled. So the injection comes from China, and young people are being disabled. You'd have to be an idiot or not have any sense of self-preservation not to ask questions. And something else that's coming from China is the PCR tests, which I got very sick after taking a PCR test, like I was poisoned. I was so ill. And some of the PCR tests have had to be recalled. And others have been linked to the collection of DNA. And China is also interested in, being the world's hegemon on collecting the world's DNA for its own purposes in terms of, control of data and thus control of the rest of the world. And also the masks, the needles, like all of it is made in China. And there have been impurities or problems with masks, little kids inhaling graphene. I'm not sure if it's graphene or graphene oxide. And the needles had to be recalled by the FDA because they were like jamming in people's shoulders. So, how much evidence do people need? And what you should do there is like start to do a proper investigation. If there's no problem with China, then let us into the Wuhan lab. If there's no problem with China, then are we comfortable with our adversary, manufacturing something that's going into all of our bloodstreams? Like, when did that become a thing? The FDA is supposed to be the watchdog for that, but I can tell you from having seen these tens of thousands of documents, each one of them was in the custody of the FDA, that the FDA looked the other way when the most appalling things were done to Americans, by this company.
So how do we understand this? So all these documents, were they presented to the FDA? Were they hidden from the FDA? They were hidden?
They're in the custody of the FDA. They're given, all of them are given to the FDA as part of the FDA's decision-making process. They say at the bottom,
okay,
confidential FDA.
And so it was sort of like the VAERS data collected, right? Like just a lot of, and anything adverse just gets reported in there, correct? No mechanism necessarily, and no follow-up.
No, it's much different, Dr. Drew. I'm sorry to contradict you so directly,
Absolutely.
but it's much
Go
different.
Ahead.
Yeah, no, VAERS is, just as you say, a database where it's like these fields that are all identical and what went wrong gets entered. The Pfizer documents, and again, I really refer everyone to the War Room Daily Cloud Pfizer documents research analysis reports, the ebook on Kindle or on dailycloud.io. it it's a vast range of experiments on human beings, as well as a flood of reports of adverse events, but a lot of, I mean, the experiments, the trials as well, and
Yeah, I'm
post-marketing.
just trying to understand why what the FDA did with this data. If they had it, what if you were to ask an FDA, one of the review board members, what did you think about that? What were you looking at there? What do you think they would tell me?
Well, they're supposed to make sure that this injection is safe and effective, right? It was issued not through
Right.
the normal processes, but bypassing the normal processes through an emergency use authorization. So the FDA knew, for instance, that 1 month after the rollout, this is a shocker, that the vaccines don't work to stop COVID. Pfizer's
Right.
own internal documents show that the third most common side effect by November of 2020 is COVID, right? And Pfizer calls the injections ineffective and waning in efficacy, and vaccine failure is the other term they use. So the FDA would have this, and if the FDA was functioning correctly, they would stop everything. They'd call a press conference and they would say, "This we're having vaccine efficacy. It doesn't work. We have to pull it. We have to keep trying.
Right.
Go back to the drawing board." Or the minute they get, I mean, the reports are so shocking. The minute they get the report that shows 61 people sustained strokes within a week after being injected, and half of the stroke events were within 48 hours, they would stop everything and pull it off the market, the way they did with the swine flu vaccine with fewer deaths. Or when they saw that, this is the most shocking of all, over 60 children were injected. Again, the records of 28 of them were lost, so we don't know if they survived, but 34 of them suffered adverse events, including a 7-year-old girl had a stroke and a 2-month-old baby sustained liver damage. So at that point, the FDA, if it's doing its job, would stop everything and say, it's too dangerous, we're pulling it off the market. And this is what the FDA's only job is, but they didn't. They saw all these documents, they saw all the damage, all the harm, all the, reproductive harm, the menstrual harm, the harm
So
to
what I'm trying to understand what was going on, what happened. Now we do know a couple of the FDA directors resigned in response to the speed with which the vaccine was rolled out. But what would they say their defense? What did they do with the data? This somehow analyzed all of it and was able to put it all into a sort of spurious basket that they didn't feel was directly causational linkage, or what would they say? What were they thinking? Are there minutes or anything that we can look at that help us understand what they were doing?
That's a great question, Dr. Drew. In order to get those documents, you'd have to have a congressional investigation, or FOIA, which would be difficult. But a
We
congressional
have
investigation.
don't we really we have a congressional investigation underway right now, right? I saw Ron Paul today really taking things on kind of aggressively, particularly as it pertains to the lab leak issues and the fact that we're funding all this stuff and wanting to understand what the State Department is doing and why they've not provided the documents to answer the questions that our government is asking. It's almost like our government is running amok away from the elected officials. It's very strange.
It's so strange. I spent all afternoon with the hearings related to the Twitter files because of my own been beaten up by those people. So I'll have to catch up with that. But to my knowledge, the head of the FDA has not been asked to answer these questions. But for sure, I can tell you that the committee that the FDA and the CDC convened to approve the vaccines for under 60, to approve the vaccines for under 12, to approve the vaccines for under 5, those members of the committee, and you're right, 2 of them did resign, were not shown this material. And I've seen the presentation that they were shown. It was like a nonsensical slideshow that doesn't include any of this. So it's very possible that the FDA just kept this material from any public facing deciders. But the FDA, hundreds of people in the FDA have all of this material. It's in their custody. It's for them. It was the FDA, remember, that asked the judge not to release this material. It wasn't.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes.
So now to answer your question, what could possibly be motivating them? I mean, I'd love to hear them under oath, but speaking again as a former political consultant, the only way you get Americans dying and a federal agency not stopping everything is if the White House wants you to keep going. And I think we've seen, Hunter Biden's laptop is very germane here. I think we've seen that China, had given millions to the Biden family, and I voted for them. I'm not happy to point this out, but I think that we have a hostage administration. And that is one reason that, look, Dr. Drew, a balloon just went, you should talk to people in the military about this from the intelligence community. The United States of America let a balloon, a surveillance balloon, go all the way across our continental United States, right over our military facilities, our nuclear facilities, our populations, and waited till it was done with its mission before shooting it down. We are the laughing stock of the world, right? A normal American president with a normal relationship to the American people is not going to do that.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Mic
Sorry.
drop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, listen. Yeah, Susan, any questions?
My biggest concern is our children's future, and the fact that they're going to try to get the vaccine incorporated into the children's, mandated vaccines in California. It just makes me insane. And the fact, it scares me for our future. I want my kids to reproduce. Or have the ability if they decide to. It's amazing to me that we're all just caught up in this and we just keep getting vaccinated or having our kids get vaccinated.
Well, what's
or
more astonishing
pregnant
is
mothers getting vaccinated, or
that we can't take a good look at all this and decide, give people the risk reward analysis, have an informed consent around whether they would do or don't want to get it. It's up to the patient and the doctor, but we can't even ask the questions. I still want to know.
I'm glad we're not getting censored right now, because every time we've had Naomi on in the past, we've had our YouTube channel taken down and put back up again.
It's true. It's an improvement.
But at least now we're able to talk about it openly.
I want to know what happened to Damar Hamlin. Just tell me that. And if it's something that tilts towards some suggestible things, I want that explained. That's all. Very simple. Nothing intrusive. Just what was that? What happened to him? What do we think that was? And do we think anybody else is going to have any problems like that? That's all. Why can't we ask that question? It's the most bizarre thing on earth. I'm completely prepared to say it's all COVID or COVID plus vaccine or vaccine alone. I don't know, because we're not even allowed to ask the question. And that's the part to me that is. I'm
also going to say that the same thing kind of happened to Bob Saget, because, he works in television. He was America's dad, and he worked for big companies. And I always wondered why we didn't get the whole story behind his death.
Well,
we saw what happened to Heather McDonald, and it blows me away how we sweep this under. Public figures are public figures. Like, if it happened to Drew, you'd know everything. That's why when you become an athlete or a public figure, you kind of have to open up your world. It's just the way it is.
Well, and look, people go, well, he wouldn't want his insurance. He doesn't want his insurance to know. His insurance knows he dropped dead on the field. I promise. And they will demand an explanation for that. So trust me, the insurance company will know what happened to him. But it will be a confidential exchange with the insurance company. And he's under no obligation to share this with us. I understand that. But you would think he'd want to share it at least with the NFL so they could reduce the risk of other players.
I think they know. I think they just don't make it public because they don't want to ruin football.
Maybe. And if you see suddenly all the players going in for a cardiac MRI, well, then we know it was myocarditis. If you don't see that, well, maybe it was a pulmonary embolus. I don't know what this was, but something needs to be explained. Well, listen, Naomi. Something? Yeah, go ahead.
Almost like as a review. Hi, this is Caleb Nation, the producer over on the side screen. I was just listening to all of this, and it's so amazing to hear from Naomi after a year and to just realize, oh my God, she was right a year ago, and she's been saying this the whole time. Right. So it's unfathomable to me that it would be so large. And now, especially after doing this year of shows, now my eyes, I feel like, have been opened to everything. And now I just see it everywhere. And so I'm putting these pieces together in my head and maybe trying to review this for the people that are watching. when I looked it up earlier, Pfizer's revenue was $51 billion in 2019, $100 billion by 2021. So my thought has always been that if their motivation is money, then it doesn't make sense for them to purposefully release something that's a harmful product that could end up ruining their reputation and tanking their big cash cow. But now we obviously know that they're saying one thing publicly, this safe and effective line, but then behind the scenes, what we saw in the Pfizer videos, they're saying they're concerned. They don't know what's going on. So to me, when I put these together, it seems like there's only three more options that make sense, which is one, Big Pharma rushed this vaccine out. They made a big mistake in the fog of war, but they'll never ever admit it because it'll bankrupt them. Two, it's what you've been saying, is like this entire fiasco has been the Chinese communist world takeover plan from the start, and all of it from the leak to the vaccine to the mask to everything is all connected in an enormous takeover plan. Or three, and this is the one that I don't want to say it because it's making all of my conspiracy theorist relatives, it's making me need to go apologize to all of them. It's this idea that there is a cult of elites that are convinced that the only way forward for humanity in the long run, for us to thrive, is to depopulation and slowing down reproduction. So which of those three makes the most sense to you, Naomi, or are they all combined in some way?
All the money.
Yeah. So 2 and 3 can go together, right? I mean, I don't see pharma, and I say this in my book, The Bodies of Others, I don't think pharma is the main driver. I think pharma is just the kind of murder weapon or the disability weapon. And sure, they're making a gazillion dollars. But, again, thinking with my political hat, what you see all the way up the chain of activity is impunity. Nobody's scared. They're finally getting a little scared. But Dr. Fauci wasn't scared. A year and a half ago, I was on Tucker Carlson, and I had almost no evidence except the fact that Dr. Fauci was mocking President Trump. I guess it was more than a year and a half ago. And I said, Dr. Fauci doesn't work for us. And I know that because when you have a functioning White House in the United States of America, people don't go rogue visibly and kind of betray the president of the United States. Even if they hate the president of the United States, you don't keep your job, right? What we were saying earlier, in a normal time, the FDA, federal agency, doesn't let Americans get murdered because the White House would have their, would leak against them, hang them out to dry, ruin them, ruin their reputations, take legal action against them. So none of this is normal politically. Like none of it is normal. So now going back to what's really going on, behind Pfizer is China and Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum and all these bad actors that I identify in The Bodies of Others, really working in alignment, in lockstep. But I didn't want to reach this conclusion, but I've seen clips, and Ralph Barrick's lab assistant went on to write a novel which has really affected me, in which he kind of fictionalizes this mad scientist who loves animals and knows that the planet is going to die unless people are killed off or the population is drastically reduced. And there are clips from 30 years ago of, elites being interviewed saying things like, well, of course once we hit 8 billion, it's unsustainable. We'll have to reduce the population. And the reason I'm so haunted by this one clip, and I have to find out more about it, but it was a credible clip, it was a real person, is he was saying something like, well, no one wants to go around lining people up against a wall and shooting them. So, a way to render people infertile is far preferable. And I know elites. I was part of the global elite until 2 years ago. I know how they think. And they totally could see themselves going, oh no, the planet will not sustain, more than 8 billion people. We have to save it. We have to solve everything. We're the good people. It's much merciful to do it this way. So let's save everybody by, painlessly ruining people's fertility. and killing off some older people in the process.
Is it possible that it could be both, where it's something where it's the lab leak happened, they're like, well, this is our chance, like we're going to jump on it, in the same way where I feel like a lot of people jumped on the, like universal basic income and a lot of other political things during the pandemic and said, oh, we need to get all these things installed for this reason, and use the pandemic as a vehicle to push things through that didn't really have much to do with the pandemic in the first place. Like, could this have been, oh, there's this pandemic that's happening now, let's also get this done at the same time while everyone's distracted by this. Let's put something in this, either if it's the vaccine or if it's some sort of modified version of the virus, and sneak it through. Who does it seem like is at the top here? Does it seem like it's a group of global elites that believe that we need to depopulate the earth if we're going to survive in the long term, and they think it may be their duty for that, falsely, but they think it's their job? Or is it specifically China? Like, China's like, we want to reduce everyone else's population other than ours.
Well, this is a great conversation. I mean, it's always a great conversation with all of you, but I just met you, so this is these are great questions. In politics at that level, there's alliances of people who may not like each other at all, but they'll have a shared goal, even temporarily. So absolutely, the WHO is enmeshed with China and with Bill Gates. China uses Bill Gates to buy up farmland in the United States, for instance. Bill Gates is very much a cat's paw for China. Bloomberg, invests in China and is aligned with China economically. Bloomberg rolled out the maps that everyone used to declare that there was a pandemic, right? And I have a chapter in my book pointing out that those maps are totally unverifiable. No one's allowed to see the underlying data sets. So we literally don't know how severe the pandemic really was. So there are these entanglements of alliances, right? And I've kind of sketched out the key ones, but definitely we all know the World Economic Forum is kind of coordinating a lot of this at a high level. That said, I don't have any evidence that it wasn't an accident for the virus to escape, but I have evidence. What makes me think that it was intentional is a couple of things. Event 201, which was held in 2019, before any lab leak. And also the fact that Klaus Schwab's book was published in June of 2020, meaning he was writing it in 2019, because it takes at least 6 months to publish a book. So there was, and the last thing I would say, and this is definitely via my husband, the Intel guy, but think back to 2018 to 2019, they're all over the West. And I think the Me Too movement was part of this. I think it was, like many movements, a real thing, but also exploited and orchestrated, right? And I say this as a survivor of, sexual abuse. I'm not diminishing what happened to any of those women at all by saying this. But one thing that happened in 2019 is that, and me too, like I was attacked reputationally that year, but think about all the people who could have been thought leaders were attacked in 2018 to 2019, or infiltrated or degraded in some way, reputationally, or had audits, or there was like a clearing of the chessboard, in advance of 2020, leaving us really without leaders. And there was this intense, and BLM is part of this. And again, I say this as a passionate anti-racist, right? BLM has direct ties to the Chinese Communist Party, and it gets funded by them. And we were locked in. Oh, you're allowed to go outside to protest for BLM, right? But the reason I mention this is that just prior and in the middle of a time when American patriotism or American love of country could unite us to kind of fight back, there was this aggressive and, critical race theory too. Again, I'm a total anti-racist, but aggressive, like changing of the terms of discussion about America so that we're not supposed to even like America or like each other, across racial lines. And so to me, all of that suggests that, is more aligned with not a lab leak. But also the last thing is, do we even know that it was in one moment? Because there was COVID-19 being covered at the end of 2019 in Chinese medical journals and in Nature. And this kind of got memory hold, but it could be that there was this, virulent infection around, and maybe 9/10 of what we've been told about it is messaging.
Maybe a test run. They wanted to see how quickly it would spread, and then
You guys,
further.
I do have to wrap. I have to wrap up right now. I've got to go ahead.
I have
Caleb.
one last question. Just because you're such an expert on the way that the Chinese Communist Party thinks, I could do a whole show just me asking you questions. It's amazing. But one piece of this that has always confused me, that I just can't quite grasp the reasoning behind it, is I understand that in China, two big things stand out to me. Is one is that they've tried to limit the amount of children over the years, and for decades they tried to limit. They believe it was a 2-child rule, and then during the pandemic they supposedly released that to allow them to have people to have more children. Also, the tracking of people's faces for their social credit system. It didn't make sense to me, if this is all a plan from the Chinese Communist Party, to then impose something that requires masking on people's faces that could hinder their social credit system that was pretty big in the news right before and in the beginning of the pandemic. Where do those things fit in? Why would they push something that would require masking that would interfere with that plan? And why would they also push something that would kind of almost force them to release this decades long restriction on how many children people could have?
So I don't know about the release of the restriction on children. I just want to remind people that China was forcing abortions and forcing a 1-child policy, alone in the world. And so that's yet another kind of smoking gun, that this thing that intervenes so intimately in reproduction, is aligned with the way they manage populations. It's a very un-Western thing. Right.
Right. It affects the old people the most. And so it's almost like
you got to, and they would put the young girls, the female babies, into orphanages. They put, ban them, this kind of thing. And you got to remember, the one thing I keep saying is, those things that we look at as unconscionable, and I've used a word, what'd you call it, sadistic, they see it as glorious, heroic, and patriotic. You've got to understand, this is the glory of the wonder of China, that they lock down, that they, do all these horrific things to their population. The population will cooperate because it is a patriotic duty to do so. But listen, you guys, I've got to.
It's terrifying.
We'll bring her back.
We'll bring her back
for the Caleb and Naomi show.
For the Caleb Chinese Communist Party show. But I am hoping that at least some, if not most, of what you're thinking is wrong. I'm hoping, but I know now not to be dismissive and to sit by and see what the evidence shows. And my last question to you is, all that data that's up from Pfizer, are the press getting it? Are they reading it? Are they just ignoring it? What are they doing? Why isn't it sort of more in the news?
Well, thank you for asking. It's been in the top 10 Kindle ebooks for, from the minute it was published. And I think it's in the top 30 now, and that's literally word of mouth, because of course, not only have we had no legacy media coverage, but the New York Times created a new rule that you can't be in the bestseller list as a Kindle ebook if you're produced by a single vendor, which is what we are. And they produced that rule just in time. It would have been the week that we would have appeared on the bestseller list in the New York Times. So it's being, look, it's not just a record of the greatest crime against humanity. It's a massive map to prosecution. So the people who are guilty, which is kind of everyone in the establishment, are going to ignore it. But I ask your viewers to read it and gift it. You can gift it on Kindle. And I just want to leave everyone too with a note of hope, because I know that was a really heavy conversation. America is the greatest country on earth. It's the best idea humanity has ever had. And, we won 2 world wars, and I thoroughly believe that if we really understand what's going on, it's a new kind of war. But if we reclaim our community and our, our constitution, and our sense of mission as a nation, I'm sure we can overcome this giant evil.
We will leave it at that, Naomi. I'll bring you back soon. Thank you so much for sharing this with us, drnaomiwolf.com, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you both.
You bet, Naomi. Thank you. Great to see you. Susan, I have to wrap this up right here. Any last comments from you?
Nope, I just wanted to end it with a few dog barks, and we're ready to go.
Let's put tomorrow's guest up. We have someone who's been very against in the UK, the vaccination of children. She's had some success there in the government. Molly Kingsley, I think it's her name. Yeah, Molly Kingsley and Dave Rubin on Monday. Duncan Trussell on Thanksgiving Day. I beg your pardon, on Valentine's Day. It's when I give thanks for what I've got in my life.
I'll be
with
giving
Susan.
thanks too.
Yeah. And Jessica Rose coming in the 15th with Dr. Kelly coming back. That should be very interesting. And then Brooke Jackson, the whistleblower, on the 22nd. Again, tomorrow is 11 a.m. Pacific time. We're at a completely different time. Make sure I got that on my schedule. Yeah, 11 a.m. tomorrow. We'll see you then. Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help. Doctors should not be doing tests unless they know what they're going to do with the results and know what they're looking for. And if you don't have clinical features of herpes, the blood tests don't mean shit.
Right.
They don't mean anything. So that's a perfect example.
Well, I don't have clinical features of fatty liver. So what the hell do we do?
Well, using a lot of alcohol is one of the clinical features of fatty liver.
I took a month off. It's erased. How fast does it come back?
Pretty quick.
Pretty quick. All right.